All right. Now that we're just a couple minutes in, let's go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Graham with Clickboarding. We're all super excited to host you today for our webinar on the Valley of Uncertainty with Aptitude Research. Today, we're going to start with a formal share out of the latest research report from Madeline at Aptitude. And we're going to end it with a panel discussion and some Q&A, given the questions you all submitted, as well as a live conversation. And before I start the findings share out, let's do a quick round robin of introductions for the panelists today. Madeline, let's start with you.
Sure. Thanks, Michelle. Hi, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here. I am the founder of a company called Aptitude Research. We do research on HR technology, talent acquisition technology, employee experience. So onboarding is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. And fun fact, David and I actually worked together probably 15 years ago. So, and I was onboarded when we worked together. So we have lots to talk about.
We do.
Awesome.
So David Corrigan, I work here at Clickboarding. We're an employee engagement platform, and I support our go-to-market strategies, sales and marketing organization. I've been in the space, as Madeline said, about 15 years now, on the analyst advisory side as well as the solution provider side. So excited to join the conversation. Michelle.
Awesome. And hi, everyone. Like I said, I'm Michelle. I'm our head of marketing at Clickboarding. Been with Clickboarding for 2.5 years and that same amount of time in HR, but I love this community. Super excited to do these events and hear from you all. So we'll start, like I said, by a share out of our report findings from Madeline. So let me present that deck.
Hi, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here to share with you some new research that we've done at Aptitude Research on onboarding. This is actually the first look, the sneak peek of this new research study that we did in partnership with Clickboarding, and I'm very excited to share these results with you. Onboarding is one of those topics that everyone can relate to. We have all had negative onboarding experiences that shaped how we felt about the employer at the time. And we've all had positive new hire experiences, hopefully, that have shaped how we felt about working for this company at the time. And we know the impact that onboarding has on retention, on productivity, on engagement. And yet what we found in this research study is that looking back over the past 2 decades, not much has changed. Companies are not investing enough in onboarding. Companies face many of the same challenges with lack of ownership around onboarding, with lack of the right technology and capabilities, and lack of clearly defined metrics. So we're going to talk about what's remained the same in onboarding over the past 15 years. I'm going to share with you some of this new research, and I'm going to share with you what the future of onboarding can look like, how it can help companies address compliance, but also really provide a very positive new hire experience and impact the business around performance, retention, and productivity. So we're going to get started. Just to share with you a little bit about our research methodology here at Aptitude, we do a combination of quantitative and qualitative research. So we do several major studies and surveys each year. We did one for onboarding, and we combine that with qualitative interviews, interviewing companies to find out what really matters to them. And having done this research for many, many years and looking at what's changed this year, we found that with the pandemic, with the challenges with finding talent today, with the challenges with retention and this uncertain economy that we're in, companies are really thinking about onboarding, prioritizing onboarding, and recognizing its importance to the business. So we're going to talk about 3 different things here today. We're going to talk about this current state of onboarding. What are the challenges companies are facing? How are companies investing in onboarding? We're going to look at the future state. What are the shifts that companies need to make in ownership and technology, and how they think about engaging with new hires? And then finally, we're going to wrap up with a very exciting discussion that I'll be having with Michelle Graham and with David Corrigan at Clickboarding around what companies really need to do to be able to take action on some of these strategies that we're going to talk through. So let's talk about the current state of onboarding. It's definitely been quite a year in all of our worlds. I just want to give everyone so much credit, whether you're in HR, whether you're in talent acquisition or learning and development. The challenges that you've had to face over the past few years are definitely more than you probably ever faced in your career, with thinking through the pandemic, thinking through supporting your employees in a very remote environment for many organizations, and thinking through the great resignation and the talent shortage that we've been facing. So it definitely has not been easy, but the work that you're doing, it's so meaningful and it impacts your company, but also it impacts individuals. And onboarding is one of those areas that definitely impacts the individual. What we found is that companies that invest in onboarding really are able to build that relationship. It's that first impression between employee and employer in a very meaningful way. Three things are really shaping how companies think about onboarding today, and some of these haven't changed, but they're certainly bringing this conversation to light here. The first that I want to talk about is the impact that onboarding has on retention. I mean, regardless of what industry you're in, retention is a huge topic right now. Companies are finding challenges with employees not showing up for day one. We found that 1 in 5 companies said they've had experiences where employees don't even show up on day one. 1 in 2 companies have had experiences where they don't come back on day 2. So this first impression is so important on retention. 86% of companies believe that new hires make the decision to stay in that first 90 days. The second piece is around branding and around communication. We found that 75% of new hires are sharing their experience on the first day of work on their social channels. And we know how much money companies spend on employer branding, on recruitment marketing. Companies are spending millions of dollars, and that's sort of been booming. I just had a conversation with a company this morning about how this spend on employer branding is just skyrocketing. All of that investment goes to waste if you're providing a very negative new hire experience, if you're not connecting employees with the company right from the beginning and providing more meaningful experiences. So companies really have to think about and rethink through onboarding in terms of the investment that you've made in talent acquisition and employee experience. So this idea of employer branding as being impacted by onboarding is really a different way of framing this conversation. And then the final piece and influence is around quality of hire. 93% of companies believe that managers know if their new hire is quality in that first 90 days. And we know quality of hire, it's that holy grail, it's the metric that everybody wants to get after. Onboarding plays such a role in helping companies get insight into quality of hire, but also impacting that relationship between managers and the new hire. So onboarding is definitely playing a role in all of these big topics that we've been hearing in the workforce over the past year. We asked companies what their talent priorities were this year, and we saw a little bit of a shift. Certainly efficiency is number one, reducing time to fill. Not surprising. I think every industry is facing challenges with speed and thinking about time to fill and thinking about improving efficiency. But with that, experience plays a huge role in talent priorities as well. And it's not just the candidate experience, it's the new hire experience as well. So we're seeing that this focus on new hire experience is more of a priority than it was last year. And the surprising thing to me about doing this research, and I think I expected this going into the study, but it was certainly validated by the data, is that companies are not spending enough on onboarding. You look at the spend and the increase in spend in talent acquisition this year, 73% of companies have increased their investment in talent acquisition technology. And we see that all the time. New providers are entering the market. There's lots of different options. Companies are spending like crazy on this area of technology. If you look at it, employee experience, it's nearly the same. 64% of companies have increased their investment in employee experience technology this year. And if you look at different areas like wellness and well-being, mental health, employee engagement surveys, it's not surprising to see that companies are really focused on these areas. And it's not just coming from HR, it's coming from the CHRO and often the executive suite too. And then you look and compare this to onboarding, and you're seeing that only 28% of companies have increased their investment in onboarding. Yet onboarding is that critical component between pre-hire and post-hire. It's impacting retention in the first 90 days. It's impacting quality of hire, and companies are just not investing there. So why is that happening? So of the few of the challenges that came up when we looked at the research and why companies just are not prioritizing onboarding the way that they're prioritizing talent acquisition and employee experience. And the first challenge I want to talk about is lack of ownership. And I think this is where a lot of organizations get really stuck. Onboarding is sort of this area that falls in between talent acquisition and employee experience. And for some companies, there's a struggle between should talent acquisition own this? Should learning and development own this? Should HR own this? And this really kind of murky ownership, conversation plays a part into why it doesn't become more of an investment opportunity. We're going to talk about some of the shifts in how companies are thinking about onboarding, but also establishing strong ownership. There isn't a right or wrong answer here. It doesn't necessarily have to be in talent acquisition or learning or HR, but there needs to be a clearly established champion of onboarding, and it really needs to be collaborative as well. Everyone benefits from a strong onboarding process. Length of the process is another important piece and challenge that companies face. I think for many of us, we've had onboarding experiences that lasted just the first day of work, maybe a 2-week orientation where you had to go somewhere else and go through this orientation process. But the pandemic completely changed onboarding. It completely changed the new hire experience. Companies had to delay the start date. Companies that were in person now are hybrid or remote. Some companies are not going back to an in-person onboarding or orientation process. We found 49% of companies still have some type of remote virtual onboarding approach. And for a lot of companies, that onboarding either becomes too short or it's just ignored altogether. So really the best practice is to think about starting onboarding before day one, doing pre-boarding to make sure that we're engaging with talent so that they don't receive an offer and then they're ignored for 2 weeks to a month where they don't receive any communication. What can companies do to pre-board to make sure talent's engaged? We're seeing a lot of different examples, and we found in our research with 1 in 5 companies saying that their new hires aren't showing up for day one. Sometimes they get recruited back to their organization. Sometimes they find other opportunities. This is especially true in organizations like retail and hospitality. So thinking about the pre-boarding piece is so important, but also extending onboarding past 90 days. Organizations that extend it to 6 months and sometimes even a year, where they're really looking at how can we engage new hires? How can we make sure that they feel part of the company, that they are feeling like they have these opportunities for growth early in their time with us? Really are companies that are able to see those results. So length of process definitely becomes a challenge. Poor understanding of the impact on retention. I think companies recognize that onboarding does impact retention, but it falls under this nebulous area where it doesn't feel like we can measure that ROI. We found that only 40% of companies are measuring the ROI of their onboarding process. So companies have to really look at this as a direct impact on the business, and retention is a business metric. They have to look at how onboarding plays a role in improving retention. And then the final piece, and this is definitely a challenge for organizations that we surveyed, is the lack of tools and technology. For a lot of companies, onboarding is something that they'll get from their ATS or maybe their LMS, maybe even from their core HR provider. And a lot of those systems have modules for onboarding, but they don't necessarily have very robust capabilities. They're not providing really updated new hire experiences. They're not able to provide the right type of communication to reach talent where they need to be met. They're not able to even support pre-boarding for a lot of these systems. I went back recently and I looked at a report I did about 15 years ago and found some of the screenshots for a lot of these systems. And unfortunately, a lot of these ATS systems have not improved much. It's just a new hire portal, very little engagement, and really not getting after that improved experience. So we'll talk a little bit about how companies are shifting away from some of these traditional systems. So let's talk about the future state of onboarding. What's changed and what still needs to change for organizations? We're seeing some shifts in onboarding, and for a lot of companies that had to shift overnight during the pandemic to go from doing onboarding one way, maybe through an orientation, to now doing onboarding completely virtual. These shifts were just a Band-Aid approach, and it was just a quick fix to be able to put something in place for the short term. Now companies, as we look to 2023, are really starting to say, what do we need to change? What do we need to transform with onboarding? How can we think a little bit differently around ownership, technology, and the capabilities that we need? So we're going to talk a little bit about ownership. I think everyone has a different opinion about where onboarding should sit and where it belongs. I don't necessarily believe that there's a right or wrong answer here. I think for organizations that have it within HR, have it within learning and development, sometimes they can be very successful with the right tools and the right capabilities to be able to support that. What I am seeing, though, is talent acquisition as a function has become more sophisticated, and retention is becoming a metric that a lot of TA leaders are being measured on. And when you think about how important onboarding is within this TA function, oftentimes companies either don't have the skills or they don't necessarily have, again, that technology to be able to support that. So if your company is building out this TA function, if you're looking at different recruiting teams or experience teams or operations teams, onboarding needs to be part of that equation. And that can be anything from thinking through pre-boarding to be able to really put the right program in place and then invest in the right technology to be able to make those improvements. So we're seeing TA as really being an area where companies can empower their TA teams to think about onboarding. Another shift is in technology. Again, for a lot of organizations, onboarding is just something that you get already from your existing systems, maybe from your HRMS or your core HR system. Maybe it's something that's part of your ATS and you have a module for onboarding or your LMS. And for, again, a lot of those systems, onboarding tends to be an afterthought. It's not their heritage. It's not where they have deep domain expertise. So you're going to get some basic capabilities and a basic workflow to be able to support how you engage new hires and a basic employee portal. Technology that's really dedicated to onboarding can provide a much better experience to your new hires, but also can provide a better experience for your managers too, helping them to be able to see what they need to do, the tasks that they need to take, stay compliant, and then be able to create relationships that are not just through a very static portal, but are much more engaging. A lot of these systems think through areas like cross-boarding, internal mobility, such a big topic right now in our market. How can we think about aligning onboarding with internal mobility to be able to really provide opportunities early within a new hire's career? And I know we're going to have a little bit of this discussion later on in our presentation today. So what are the benefits of automation and what are the benefits of thinking about technology to be able to support onboarding? It's interesting when I look at this and I see that improving engagement and improving retention are the top two benefits that we found from companies. And that's so positive to me because having done this research in the past, it tends to be compliance. Like this is, we're terrified that our new hires are going to fill papers out incorrectly. E-Verify is, an important discussion and conversation within this industry, and was for a long time. We have to think about making sure that, we're not going to get audited and have to spend a lot of money on, this process of forms management. And that is so important, and it's definitely a driver for investing in technology. But there's another piece too, and that's around engagement and retention and providing experiences. And what I'm encouraging organizations to think about is that it doesn't have to be one or the other. You don't have to pick compliance over engagement. I think I've even been guilty of that in the past too, of trying to prioritize one versus the other. And it doesn't have to be sacrificing one for the other. You can have both. You can provide exceptional experiences and at the same time ensure compliance, improve productivity, and reduce costs, reduce paperwork. So thinking holistically about all these benefits, I think can really help if you're building a business case for technology. So when we ask companies about capabilities and what they're thinking through for capabilities, this is where there was a little bit of gap between those priorities and what companies are thinking about as those drivers and benefits of technology to the actual capabilities that they're using. And you can see here that for most companies, the capabilities are around the forms piece. Next is the new hire engagement, mentoring, so positive to see that as an important piece of onboarding, surveys, cross-boarding, and even buddy programs. When I think about onboarding and the conversations that we've seen, happen around the space, is there's really kind of three buckets to me for thinking about capabilities. The first is compliance, and that's filling out forms correctly, the forms management piece that goes along with that, ensuring compliance. The next piece is really around tasks or provisioning, and that's making sure your new hires have everything that they need before day one, on day one, whatever it's going to take to make this new hire experience positive. So it's all of those tasks. That could be anything from making sure they have a laptop, making sure that they're part of any internal networks that you're using. They've connected with people on their team. They know where their manager is going to be. If you're in an office environment, as some companies have returned to office environments, do they have a parking pass? Do they understand what the day is going to look like? Do they understand about lunch? We even found in research that we've done in the past that lunch is like a big issue for new hires. They want to know if they should bring lunch in on the first day. And then the final piece is the engagement piece. It's the new hire experience. It's thinking about mentoring. It's thinking about providing engagement. It's connecting new hires with existing employees. It's thinking about buddy programs. It's thinking about internal mobility and opportunities for development. And there's so much work that still needs to be done in that area, but it continues to evolve. So when we look at kind of the traditional systems around onboarding and then this future state of onboarding and automated onboarding, it really addresses all of those challenges we talked about earlier. The lack of consistency, making sure every single new hire has an opportunity, a fair and equal opportunity to get the same new hire experience as everyone else. Providing clear ownership, because tasks and responsibilities that can be triggered through automation kind of take that ownership conversation, and it makes it a little bit less scary, a little bit less important, because the technology is taking on a lot of that work. It's making sure that things are moving through the process. Reducing paperwork, providing a better experience, and then addressing compliance as well. So a lot of change is happening, but there's still lots of work to be done in onboarding. I love this topic. I think it's so important for organizations. I think it can make a huge impact on your employee experience and the work that you're doing within your company to be able to really think about the future of work. So I'm excited now because I'll be joining Michelle and David for a discussion. Thank you.
All right, welcome back, everyone. And thanks to those chatting with us throughout the session. Awesome findings, Madeline. Super excited to discuss. So I'll go ahead and kick us off with the group we have here. Given the latest research findings Madeline just shared, how should we be defining onboarding today?
I can start, unless David, you want to start.
Feel free. You can jump in, Madeline.
Great. So to me, onboarding, when I think about the research that we did and some of these conversations, and even some of the comments that have come in this chat here, I think we tend to define it historically as like a moment in time. Like, this is one activity that we're doing, we're checking a box, and onboarding is an experience. And I think that's where we need to shift our definition from being this moment in time to being an experience. It's an experience that is the beginning of the employee experience, but also the transition between pre and post hire. It's so critical. I mean, it's in everything that we found in the research, everything we just talked about. It impacts retention, it impacts experience, it impacts productivity. And I think when companies think about like what exactly does this include, it's that experience from helping a new hire to be able to feel part of the company culture, to feel engaged, to feel connected, to feel like they are a human that is part of this organization. And at the same time, it's helping the company to ensure compliance and to make sure that this transition is happening in a way that, ultimately supports all of their other talent initiatives. So, I think that's, kind of a long answer to say, I think this is an experience, and I don't think we often think about it that way.
I agree with that. And I think the second piece is really we need to reimagine what onboarding is and break it down. And what onboarding really is you preparing somebody to be successful in something you're asking them to do and helping prepare them. I think the other area, and I was listening to what you just went through, Madeline. Imagine if we started measuring retention at the point of offer. Imagine if organizations started measuring offer, retention at the point of offer instead of looking at fallout. If we started looking at retention, so what that would really do is allow us to say, okay, we've invested this money in our talent acquisition programs, but the hiring managers made the hiring decision. If we treated those candidates as we would somebody who's already started day one, then there is the line of sight. There is the ability for the organization to be impactful on the experience and to build that community around these candidates. So again, that was just as I was listening, I imagined if we, just take a change fallout to retention and imagine how much that would force organizations to think differently about that transition between candidate to employee. Michelle.
I love that. Mhm.
Awesome. Thanks, David. And yeah, we're seeing some great questions come through. And in the form submission, a couple of you submitted questions on the length of onboarding. How long should it be? How detailed should it be? I'd love to pose that to Madeline and David here.
Yeah, I think with an orientation, like an orientation is 2 days, or it's like a week, maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks. And for a lot of organizations, that's all they're doing with onboarding. I think onboarding and like a best practice is definitely to think about the experience, to David's point, before day one, and then to think about retention at the point of offer, but then extend it, 3 months, 6 months, and for a lot of organizations, it's a year. It's how do we think about this experience and how meaningful we want to make this experience? And it's not going to be 2 weeks. So, I think at a minimum, it has to be 90 days. That tends to be the standard in measuring onboarding. But for a lot of organizations, they're extending that experience into sometimes the first year.
Yeah, and I would, as you look at that experience and that timescale, look at the outcomes you're trying to achieve. So back in like what was it, 2010 when we were at Burson, onboarding sat within learning development. It was orientation. Do I have the tools I need to do a job? So if we look at that piece, then secondarily, am I preparing these candidates to be part of the team, or am I asking them to come and assimilate into us? So again, there's the sentiment piece. Are we preparing them to be part of the organization widely? So I think we need to look at the outcomes that we're looking for these, for these people coming to our organizations and track that against what's needed to get to them where they need to be. And onboarding is constant. If I'm asked to do a stretch assignment or I'm looking to move across an organization, you called it out earlier, Madeline, around talent marketplaces, internal mobility. If you've already spent that money to bring somebody in to the organization and they're not in the right spot, how do we help them move? How do we help them be prepared for that opportunity to take new interviews, to represent themselves to hiring managers, and then to transition off across the organization? So I think onboarding needs to be looked as actions with outcomes as opposed to just a bucket of something we do in HR.
Love that. Yeah, agreed. And like we say at Clipboarding, it never truly ends. You're always onboarding throughout your tenure, through every transition as you take new roles, stretch assignments. I love that example, David. And Cheyenne submitted a question I'd love to address real time. What strategies have you used or would you recommend to get buy in from people leaders that onboarding matters and to ensure accountability?
I love this question. I love this question because I think so often like onboarding becomes an afterthought. Like it's like we're spending so much money on employee experience. We don't know what the economy is going to look like in the next year. So we're going to shift things around a little bit and onboarding becomes, pushed on the back burner for a lot of organizations. And to me, like to build that business case and show the value, I think it starts with what David's talking about. Like we have to define what those outcomes are. And step one is defining what your goals are. Like what are your goals and objectives as an organization? And then looking at what metrics within onboarding can you start to track to be able to define just for onboarding what success will look like. So get curious about what the company goals are. Look at the metrics in onboarding that will align with those goals start to get really curious and create insights about why these metrics are either important or why you're hitting these metrics or not hitting these metrics, and start to just, create conversations around that, create insights. To me, insights is just conversation. And then start to take action and to show that if we do this, if we spend on this, we're going to be able to see these metrics improve and ultimately improve the goals for our company. So to me, it starts with that outcomes piece, and I think that's so important. And I think the other piece that I'd say two other things is kind of look at what the experiences are. I mean, if your organization has had employees leave in the first year, employees not showing up on day 2, which we saw in the research is happening quite a bit, that ghosting is a reality. That's an important piece that will definitely get the attention of your business leaders. That's impacted by just onboarding. You can see immediate results. And then I'd say the last piece of advice I'd have to build that case is start to look at your competitors. I think when you're looking at talking to executives in your organization, when you're looking at talking to C-level executives, they care about their competition and they want to know what other organizations are doing better. And that definitely gets their attention. So start to get curious about what some of your competitors' onboarding experiences are. If they're not great, that also will be more of a driver for investing in onboarding.
And I think to add into this, there's a couple of things. I think Tom also mentioned, what's the first step to onboarding, versus simple orientation. So I think it's the feedback loop too. So you mentioned that there are those metrics, and we'll start measuring progress metrics. It's a destination, but what's the feedback loop to TA? What's the feedback loop to the rest of the organization to adjust to get that, to allow that? I mean, biggest no-show day 2 is manufacturing, where the recruiter maybe hasn't said, it's noisy, there's no air conditioning in this facility. It's the things that really matter, or they've had to, it's just not it's not as they thought it would be. And then the second area, when we look at, what's our first step to good onboarding, it's looking at your employee value proposition. How are you selling your organization to drive a commitment from those candidates to join your organization? And the moment that offer is accepted, it's flipping the script and saying, okay, how do I demonstrate my commitment back to what I've said? How am I able to start demonstrating through experience, through the way that we are, engaging with you, to ensure that that commitment is now on the company too? So I think there is the way that you're selling yourself to those candidates, differentiate yourself into the marketplace, as Madeline said. That's where you start the onboarding. You actually demonstrate and make it reality. And if you're not hitting that, that is when the sentiment starts to drop.
Yeah.
Awesome. Good point. And now we've talked about the definition a little bit, tracking of metrics. I love that, Madeline, prescribed outcomes, and getting curious about the critical KPIs that impact your business. How do we build accountability? That was a big topic in the research, right? Who owns it? What are we seeing today?
Yeah, the ownership piece, I think that's where companies get stuck, is we don't necessarily know who owns it. There's definitely other stakeholders involved in onboarding, and it's not just within HR. So I think this is where a lot of companies get stuck, is like, who should own it? No one's taking accountability. I think, and what I've seen in the research and from different conversations with companies, is when you automate a lot of these areas of onboarding, ownership isn't as much of a roadblock. It becomes something that everyone has visibility into. It's very clear who's responsible for what. And, we don't get caught of like, where does this sit? Who is responsible? Is this TA? Is this learning and development? Is this HR? And I think that can definitely help. And I think the other piece is it needs to be collaborative. And I think there's a lot of different areas in HR right now that are getting stuck on this ownership conversation. Internal mobility is another piece, that David brought up. I think we have to kind of get beyond this as a roadblock and start to think, how can we work together to deliver on these outcomes? And then how can we use technology to not make this about where does this sit, but how can we automate a lot of these experiences so new hires feel connected and we're able to have visibility into those metrics.
I couldn't agree more. It's interesting you bring the word automation because it's scary at times. Yeah, we think it's gonna, but we've been doing automations in HR for years. We don't write payroll out manually. we do employee self-service. That is automation. That's removing work that can be done more effectively, so people can be more meaningful and with their time. So I agree with that. I think it goes down to who owns 51% of this, who is actually going to be at the right, has the the right skill set, the right ability within an organization to move this forward. And for me, it's, as we think about accountability, it's about what happens between the handoffs. Yeah. So I own this piece. I'm the right part of the organization to deliver the compliance piece. I'm the right part of the organization to deliver the, the content and the right experience for these folks. Hiring manager owns more outreach between offer and first day. What we can't let is technology define what the onboarding process is. So to the sweet question, are we defining onboarding today? And I'd love your feedback on this, Madeline. Are we defining onboarding today because we have a checkbox on a suite, or are we defining it because it truly is impactful?
Right. I mean, I think that's exactly it. And it's not just this checkbox that fits within this idea of things we have to do. It becomes the foundational layer of everything that we're building on. I mean, everything employee experience is built on that new hire experience. We know that. And we know employees make their decision to stay at a company very early on. Even if they don't leave for 5 years, they've decided and they've spread the word that they are not happy early in their experience. So it becomes more of a foundational layer and not something we're squeezing in between talent acquisition and all these other areas of talent management.
I love that. And a couple questions that came in ahead of the webinar today around accountability and responsibility. And I think it's relevant, tied to the sweet player and checking the box for onboarding early days is, after that initial data collection, how do we get hiring managers more involved? How do we empower them and support them to play a big role in onboarding?
I think what's
So
interesting is oh, go ahead, David.
no, you can go ahead.
Oh. I was going to say, I think for a lot of companies, we want to blame hiring managers, and I think they're often not given the tools to actually be able to provide good onboarding experiences. I think the intention is there. They want to do that. They want to engage with new employees. And we have to kind of flip that conversation to say it's not about hiring managers not having time or not wanting to do this. They don't have what they need to provide positive onboarding experiences to new hires. So I think one is making sure, managers have the tools. So it's not busy work for them. It's actually creating relationships and creating a human experience and taking some of that administrative work and automating it. I think that definitely helps in the process. And I think we don't ask managers and we don't ask hiring managers what they need and how they want to onboard their new hires. It's just not a conversation that typically happens. So, I think that's one piece of it. And then I think there needs to be consistency. Onboarding fails when it's like everybody's doing their own thing. Like this manager does their 2 week, they do the lunch, they're taking employees out to lunch. And it creates just a feeling of this is not fair and this is not equitable within the organization. I mean, I've worked for companies where the CEO would take just certain groups within the company out to lunch when I worked in an office environment and not everybody else. And it builds resentment. I mean, it's something very silly, but it definitely, creates a feeling that is hard to take away.
I agree. I mean, it's that baseline, yeah. What we want to do is make it equitable that everybody has the same experience. Then maybe there's things layered on, but hiring managers are suffering from fatigue when it comes to email requests, when it comes to all the things they have to do. So as we think about automation, it's okay. How do we do things that in the in our onboarding process are handing off for someone to do something in another system? So am I emailing you to go into ServiceNow to provision technology? I may email into provision access to software. Are you going to have to go off the the manufacturing floor to order PPE? Like that is a real pain for hiring managers. So it's a different. I think for me it's about the automation of those things we already know the outcome of, and we can move through APIs and we can have systems enable things like that. I think secondarily it's looking at just in time. So if I've got a nudge from a system to go call a candidate, let's give them a quick article or a quick script to say what they want them to do. Like it's reminding them to do it quickly so that there's not the effort, and it's predictable, and it is standardized across the organization. So it's not saying, okay, you're now control of this. It's saying, okay, I'm asking you to do this, but we're allowing you to do it in the most effective way without without delaying the process, but without adding extra work to your plate.
I love that. And I love the call for consistency and equity, enabling that even playing field, right, for all new hires, regardless of where they're starting at. I think that's key. So, a question that came in regards to the administration and process, what are some of the basic things that we should be automating every time when new hires come on board?
I think for me and with our clients, it's starting off by a small area. So it may be things like your I-9, your W-4, your bank details, and I think we need to talk deeper about things that are very government based when we talk about equity of access. And let's jump onto that next. But those types of things that we know what the result needs to be. We know that I've had experiences where I started a job and I sat in a corner with a couple of PowerPoints and a lot of forms. And then I got also asked to go, these are 10 people in the company you should be calling, and go introduce yourself. And I spent the next 2 weeks to 3 weeks justifying why I was hired. And so I think it's those predictable things that you've done. So it's the team meetings. It's the what is on their schedule for the next 3 weeks. Who is the right people to introduce? Those are the things that we should be automating. Those things that are repetitive, very manual, but we're going to do it for everybody. So I would focus around those areas first, and then the experience piece where you need that. It's a mixture of automation and human centered. Yeah. So when a human can be, when it's people to people, that needs to be focused, but it's that stuff we know what we do, and it happens all the time. So it's that, high value, low effort piece.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think you don't have to automate everything at the same time. I think, David, to your point, and I think that's where a lot of companies get scared, where automation feels scary. It's like we're going to take the human out and now onboarding is completely automated. And that's definitely not even the best practice. Like, start to think about what are some of these areas. How do you think about providing a more human experience through technology? And that's, taking some of the workload off of your managers. That's providing consistency for candidates, providing, something that's fair. That's human. That's a better experience. And automation can help with that. I think communication is another piece where you can look at automation. For a lot of new hires, they're just dependent on their manager having time to reach out to them and engage them, let them know about the company, let them know that there's, a running club every Thursday night, whatever it may be. So to be able to automate a lot of this, make sure that it's fair and equitable. Everybody is getting the same experience in terms of understanding a little bit more about this work environment.
And you called out in your study, buddies too. I mean, it takes a village to bring somebody on board and to retain them. So if there's people in the team, take IT, yeah? If we're bringing on a highly skilled IT professional and we're going to help them to be onboarding, they're going to work with somebody. There's going to be somebody who is there going to support them through that process. Let's ensure that we're applying the right buddy system too. That's the ability to demonstrate the value and purpose that our people in our organizations have, and tell that story and start building that relationship and bond, as I said earlier, from the offer. So I think we talk about hiring managers, we talk about things like that, but I think there is an ability to drive a consensus and that community and reflect that back through this process.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I have a question, Marilyn. So it's interesting. So I think there was a study out last year by, I think it was Accenture and also Harvard, where what was it, about 27 million of the unemployed have either they criminal records, maybe they have mental illness, maybe they have, they've been part of the military. How can we leverage onboarding to help that underemployed population as we look at job shortages? Any kind of thoughts around that, and how we adjust and focus on experience more to help that population and bring them into work?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think it's such an important topic and it's not talked about enough. And onboarding, it needs to be consistent, but there needs to be a personalization as well. And not everybody wants to sit in an orientation for 2 weeks and go through the same experience, especially for, different type of workers. So I think to be able to kind of personalize some of those experiences, remote work, I saw there's a couple questions about remote and virtual onboarding. I love those questions. But I think one opportunity that really came out of the pandemic in terms of onboarding is that we can personalize these experiences. We don't have to wait for everybody to go into an office, to be there on a Monday of the first day of the month and to be onboarded in a certain way. We can tailor and personalize these experiences and be a little bit more creative about what those new hires might need and start to ask those questions that we weren't really able to do when we were kind of stuck in that office in-person mindset around onboarding. So I think that's one, not to say there's a benefit kind of coming out of this, but I think that is one way that onboarding has permanently changed.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's almost leveled the playing field. This is how deskless workers have been doing it for years.
Yeah.
Whether you're manufacturing, whether you're a truck driver, all those kind of essential services now, they've had to onboard on the fly. Yeah, they haven't had the comfort of being in a conference room and having being made welcome. So I think the other piece I also kind of like to think around is let's approach onboarding without any prejudgment. So as we think about kind of that underemployed too, if we're asking for government information, we have to explain why we're asking for it, asking them to do a background screen. What are the things that we're looking for? What are the things that maybe they won't pass, even down to things like bank accounts. If we're asking for banking information, do they have access to the right type of bank account? Are we going to be able to, maybe we have clients who, a hospital who provide a credit union and they allow to go, they do that. So there's areas where they feel that they have to self-select out through the process, and we can get better at removing those barriers as we look at the experience side, but we also think about that compliance and how we better ensure the compliance needs are understood as you're looking to bring, people who aren't active members of this workforce, or maybe you never have. So I think that those are areas where we can really demonstrate, our impact to our understanding where we are and where our organizations are drawing talent from.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love that. And it's interesting. A key theme from the report was historically organizations focused on compliance, right? And that you had to choose one or another, compliance or experience and engagement. And that's changed. And I'm curious, amidst virtual working, the post-pandemic world, why are experiences front and center?
Yeah, it's a great question. And they really are. I mean, I think part of it is the labor shortage that we saw in the past year. And we know that this is a candidate first, an employee first, a new hire first environment that we're in. I think this reality, I mean, it's become news stories, like on front page of like newspapers where we're talking about people not showing up on day one, not showing up on day two. This ghosting is not just an HR topic, it's a business topic that people are very interested in because they've experienced it in many different industries. So I think this experience economy that we're in right now is definitely one that everybody can relate to. I think where I've seen a big change in the technology is that technology played a great role in compliance and efficiency, like helping to lift that administrative burden through automation. Where we're seeing technology going now, and fortunately, a lot of providers are doing this, is to think about humanity. Like, how can we provide a better, more human experience through technology? And that's a very different way to think about a technology investment. And we're seeing that. We're seeing companies that invest in the right solutions that have really engaging HR solutions, onboarding solutions are able to provide a more human experience, and candidates like it, employees like it, they expect this. So, I think this experience economy is going to continue even if we hit this recession. And, everything's in the news. Branding's a big part of onboarding too, because people are sharing these experiences. I think it's going to continue. And I think we have to look at technology that supports experience, not just technology that supports efficiency.
I agree with this, and it's real. I read some the other day. I think it's within 8 years, um, we're going to have all of the baby boomers are going to be 65. Yeah, Like that, it's done. Like that, we are in. This doesn't happen very often. We do not have a massive transition of generations in and out of the workforce and gradually move out. So I think to your point, Madeline, it's looking through the eyes of the generation coming in of disease versus the generation that's now leaving, and we need to also understand, the way that people react today. So you go back to that first day at work, and people they're gonna push that message out. They're going to drive and amplify what they feel. And as we think about these experiences, and I think that as you go and you're talking about this human-centered technology, it's why as we talk to buyers of technology, they're looking at, okay, I have my core HR suite, which is about my people data, but now I'm looking at more of a modular platform data automation strategy where I can put in point solutions to enable that experience. So now I'm not looking at trade-offs. I'm looking at what I need today, given my business need, given where am I sourcing from, where are my people, and what is that experience I'm looking to drive. So we're seeing a lot more, and this is where we need to be focused towards, as opposed to kind of shackled from the past. Yeah.
Right, 100%.
I love that. And Joni asked a specific question I want to ask here in regards to remote working, virtual working. How many employees should you host on a Zoom call when they're starting onboarding? And I think it relates to that just in time onboarding experience and leveraging technology. Would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I don't think that there's a right or wrong answer. I mean, I know a lot of companies that will do larger Zoom meetings and have people on, and onboarded at the same time. And then companies do smaller ones. I mean, you don't want one or two. You want to make sure people feel connected, but at the same time, I think that too much can be overwhelming for a lot of employees. My advice here is I think it's not just one or the other. I kind of think you need to do all of it. Like, I think the more you're providing opportunities for those employees that learn better and are onboarded better in a big group, provide those, but also provide smaller groups where people can make connections and might feel more comfortable if it's 3 people or 4 people than they would if it's 30. So I think you kind of need to do it all, and find a platform that can support, different ways and different sizes of groups. And then I think it's also revisiting it. Someone might join and think that they want to join kind of a larger, onboarding process, and then realize that that didn't feel so great. They want the option now to connect more personally one-on-one too. So unfortunately, I think my answer is I think you've got to do it all. I don't know, David, what do you think? Michelle, what do you think?
I agree. You got the difficult one. Yeah. The one size doesn't fit all. And again, it's for me, and it's funny having been in, more of this sales marketing role during the pandemic. What I miss is the going to meet companies, and you probably do the same, Madeline, and signing in and seeing the names, and then walking to a conference room to speak to people, seeing the people around. So I think there is as we think virtually, there's cohorts and there's experiences that we need to offer different modalities, and I think it's the choice is the piece, and let them select into it. But you got the difficult question there.
Yeah.
I like how Joni actually summed it up with just saying balance, and I think that's exactly well said.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's leveraging technology, right, to deliver the message at the right moment and also in the right tone based on who they are and what team. Joni, you asked about, different divisions. Obviously, you need a platform that can deliver the right level of experience based on the expectations for their role. But then, yeah, empowering those in-person moments too. I think you just have to do it to build camaraderie, excitement, and relationships.
Oh, and we've all made mistakes, yeah. I mean, we all got at the start of the pandemic. We were all on these Zooms all the time, doing these happy hours, and I don't know. I think I spoke to like the eighth cousin removed type thing. It was like, why? Yeah. So again, there is a balance. Just measure, get feedback, understand was it good, but allow yourself to be vulnerable to make mistakes. So that wasn't good. You didn't feel good coming out of that. That's when we have to track sentiment. So I think as we look at the experiences, there's the ability to allow people to give you feedback, so you can quickly adjust. You can understanding that we mentioned earlier on, the feedback loop to ensure that what we're doing today is right. We don't just set this down today and let it kind of like transcontinental, railway track, 2 rails and go forward. No, we evolve, we adjust, and it's feedback and giving the opportunity to say, hey, that wasn't good.
Yeah, I love that. And with just a few minutes left, I want to leverage that thought, David, from you, which is it doesn't have to be perfect, right? You just have to get started and ask for feedback along the way, include your employees. So I think a closing question for Madeline and David here is what are some quick wins, easy ways to get started and implement change at your organization?
I can start just from my perspective. For me, it would be define onboarding. What are those outcomes? But I think small. It's low effort, easy, high impact wins. So we're not trying to solve everything. Let's work out where do we start. It's going to be 100 steps forward to get to where we want to be in, but we need to bring everyone with us. So I would just look at, hey, where can we gain the most alignment, most consensus, and we can solve some of those largest issues. We start there.
Yeah, I love the outcomes. I mean, I think it's so important and defining. They can change, like it can be a work in progress. It can be kind of journaling as you go. So I love that. I think that's a great place to start. I also think making onboarding more of a conversation, like ask your new hires onboarding and new hires surveys are new. Like this is not something that companies did before. And now there's great options and technology providers that allow you to survey your new hires and really ask what their experience was like. What would they, like to see differently next time? And that all can really help inform how you think through onboarding. But also going back to the earlier question about building a business case, it helps with business leaders too. If you're able to say, this is what our new hires want, this is what we need to change. They love employee engagement surveys. I mean, employee engagement surveys are a CHRO and CEO buy. That's who wants them. To be able to do the same thing for new hires is absolutely going to get people's attention. So I think to start to just make it more of a dialogue, and you can survey your hiring managers too. I think back to that question, which was so great. How do we provide, hiring managers with more tools that they need? Start to kind of collect that data and start to look at, again, what those outcomes are.
I love it. Lots of great points there. Defining it, collecting data, the key KPIs, and accountability. I think earlier, David, you mentioned who owns the 51%. I love that. If our employees and the different functions aren't motivated, it'll fall to the back of the list, right? So I want to be respectful of time. This was a wonderful conversation. We're so grateful for those of you that stuck with us. And thank you so much, Madeline, and your team at Aptitude Research. We're so excited to partner with you on this new research from June of 22. So thank you. And everyone will be sending out a copy of the report as well as a presentation from today so that you can share those internally at your organizations and get better buy-in around onboarding.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Michelle.
everybody.
Thanks,
Thank you,
David.
Madeline.
Thanks,
Thanks, Michelle.
everybody.
Thank you.